The skills we need to live and work are changing. But what does that mean for education? Over the next few weeks, we'll be talking to inspirational teachers in different countries who are taking the skills that made our modern world possible and reinventing them for a new generation. This is Old School, the skills that made us and how they're changing. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Old School, the skills that made us and how they're changing. I'm your host, Nicholas Piershaw, and today we're continuing our look at traditional skills in the Canadian Arctic. We're going to be building on our conversation in the last episode with Global Teacher Prize winner Maggie McDonnell, so please do check that episode out if you haven't already heard it. My guest today is Felix Aupalu, who is from Nunavik in northern Canada. He is the founder of All Arctic, a non-profit working with Indigenous communities in Canada. Felix, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Nicholas. Such an honor to be here.
One of the things that came out of my conversation with Maggie is how traditional skills and knowledge are being passed down in Indigenous communities in Canada and how they've changed over time. Is that something, I appreciate that's a very broad topic, but is that something that you could speak to?
I think, obviously, this is an amazing question because Indigenous peoples are known to have kept knowledge for millennia. So I can only speak to my own experience and to my experience within my own community, which is that of the Inuit. But what I can tell you is that for thousands of years, our culture and our traditions were transmitted orally. So it was an oral tradition that really kept our stories going. We had no written language, and skills were truly passed down in a more pragmatic way. So when we would go hunting or fishing, everything would be done through observation. That's how the kids learned to grasp onto the skills that they need to survive the cold Arctic. So that's how it was for most Inuit for so long. But because of our history with colonialism, there was a major shock in our traditional ways of living, and our epistemologies and our ways of knowing were inherently disrupted. Especially with the introduction of Christianity, we sort of lost this contact with our more traditional ways of knowing. So, despite the fact that we did lose some of our more traditional ways, Inuit, I would say, are still very connected to the land because we live in such a remote and secluded part of the world, which is the Arctic. So, in that sense, we haven't lost it as much, at least not as much as other Indigenous groups that live elsewhere in North America. So yeah, that being said, we for so long we were ripped away from our own minds, spirits, and bodies. So we have sort of been kept away from our true nature, which was to live in sync with nature. And I can say that there's a lot of reconnecting in both urban and rural Indigenous communities. That's been my observation, certainly. So yeah, to wrap it up, I would say, we've been able to pass down knowledge and skills mostly through oral tradition.
I'm really interested in that because that seems so at odds with what we would see as the sort of a Western way of teaching. Is that something that's a fair assessment? Was it sort of a real shock to Indigenous communities and to the Inuit people to have this new system come and rip away this, established language and way of learning?
There was a written language that was established for Inuit. It's called the Inuktitut syllabic system. So therefore, all the knowledge that we did keep, that we were able to keep, most of it has been documented. So there's organizations that take care of documenting all this. And so in a sense, yes, it's been a huge shock because we were, up until very recently, we were nomadic people. We survived off of hunting gathering. My grandma was born in a tent. I always like to embed a little bit of stories. It's a lived experience. So in a sense, it's been a major shock, and I would say that to add to that, it sort of gives us a reality of having a foot in both worlds in this day and age. Most Inuit people have English as a second language, so we're also a population that is mixed with its heritage. So we kind of embrace all of it, and this is our new reality in some way. But I can certainly say that the traditional skills and knowledge, and the way in which they've been transmitted in the past are sort of have been harshly affected by colonialism, and partly because there's a bridge and there's a gap between generations where there's very few elders in our communities. They're getting a bit older. They're not as healthy, so they don't always have the bandwidth and the capacity to sort of keep giving this knowledge to the youth. So, and that's part of our history of colonialism. So it's that's where we are today.
When I was speaking with Maggie, one of the things that struck me, and I'd be really interested in your reflection on this, is we were talking about her kayaking program, and she was talking a bit about, how the community she'd worked with had engaged with it. And she was saying, obviously, kayaking comes from this region of the world, and it's very important, or has been very important to the people there. And yet it is this international phenomenon, this sort of sporting phenomenon, which is done all over the world, but I would imagine is done with, it's sort of been, if this is a fair word, co-opted by the West, right? Like it's the vocabulary around it, the way it's taught, the way it's marketed, it would seem to me, very little to do with where it originally came from. And I found it, very interesting that, there was this sort of kayaking program that was then being reintroduced to Indigenous communities in the Arctic. And I'd be interested in your sort of reflections on that, and, what that says about the way Indigenous communities have been treated and how their culture has been, I suppose, both erased and taken.
I'm amazed that you shed light on this. I think it's something that really has to be discussed. What you say is truth. Our kayaks, the modern day world that most of the world uses for kayaks is kayak, as seen through Maggie's program. And this was the way of transportation for a lot of people that would normally, they would do this for a living. That's how we would provide for our families, go hunting, go fishing. So in a way, it's been ripped away from its original intent. I would say the intent was, it was mostly a tool for survival rather than a sport for leisure or for fun. So getting to reconnect with this amazing piece of culture and tradition, and truly it's a way of life. Kayaking is a way of life. That's a good way to help the youth reconnect, because it also forces the youth to be out on the land and to learn a pragmatic skill that they're able to embed in their activities, and also just getting to know how to build the kayak. I was never taught myself, so I don't know how to build one. I certainly know how to navigate one, but I think the fact that these projects allow for youth to have their experiences validated in a way where it's culturally relevant is really important. So I think not only building kayaks, but learning how to paddle them and navigate them is a really good way to help the Indigenous youth, no doubt.
Thanks so much, Felix. And I'm really interested in your own work with Indigenous communities, and particularly through your nonprofit, All Arctic. Can you talk a little bit about the work that it's doing?
Absolutely. So All Arctic is a recognized Inuit-led nonprofit organization that benefits all the people of the Arctic. and it's in its founding stage. It was founded in 2022, and our mission basically is to develop, implement, and foster programs for all people of the Arctic. So at the moment, it's headquartered in my hometown of Pavilnituk, which is in Nunavik, the northern part of Canada. And we're currently in the process of implementing a project called Haulirmat. And Haulirmat means because it's dawn. So because it's a youth initiative, I decided to name it Inuit Youth Contributing Towards a Bright Future, which is truly the only youth-led initiative that is not only evolving, but growing its response to the needs and dreams of the youth. And the goal is to elevate them and to reach sort of their full potential and give them the tools, confidence, and access to the pathways for funding for education and projects and everything. So this is the work that All Arctic is all about at the moment. And by working in the education sector with this project over the summer, well, we're not only building community relationships, but we're also building land-based pedagogy to help the kids reconnect with the land. And we're in a way sort of bridge builders between people and organizations that are not in the Arctic and that are not Inuit, who want to work in the Arctic and with Inuit communities and other communities in the Arctic. This is where we're from, and this is where we have kinship, family, networks. So this is the mission of All Arctic.
And why is this work so important to the communities that you're working with?
So the starting point is Nunavik is extremely remote. It's a territory that's about twice the size of France, and it's all the way up in the Arctic, and the only way to get there is by airplane. So therefore, the remoteness alone of Nunavik makes it much harder for any kind of progress to be enhanced in a way. It's far, it's costly, there's lack of infrastructure, lack of telecommunications, transportation, housing. That's the biggest problem that we have up north. So by doing this important work and trying to engage the youth, we're also able to justify the importance of not only education, but of coming together and doing this work. Like I said, you know, there's so many different problems, mostly at the infrastructural level because of the remoteness alone of the Arctic. So it's one step in a huge journey that we have to do. But if we don't do this work now, then we're gonna pass on the same problems to our children. So it's a matter of doing this important work now, so that over the generations it can not only become better, but we can sort of reconcile the past that we have in this country with the history of this country and who we are inherently as people and where we're trying to go. We've been here for thousands of years, and we'll certainly be here for the next thousands of years to come.
So I'm really interested in this point. How do you galvanize young people in the Arctic, particularly in communities which are very remote, which I assume, from what you're saying and from what I've read, are relatively disconnected from the wider world? There's a lack of internet connectivity, for example. How do you reach people? How do you get them to do things?
Great question. Actually, the single best way to reach out to, quite frankly, any member of the Inuit community is through Facebook. That's our go-to is Facebook. But because there's such big problems when it comes to infrastructure and even access to internet connection, there is sort of a digital divide that happens between what I would refer to as the Western world, you know, so Southern Canada, bigger cities, bigger urban areas, and remote communities all across the country. So in a way, the best way to engage the youth is to go directly in the community and to do the work in the community with the groups there, or if it's with the youth in the cities, then there's networks of people and organizations that were able to tap into to sort of get the word out. And universities have been pretty good at sort of opening up the floor to leave space for a bunch of amazing academic stuff and conferences and seminars and courses. So in a way, that's how we engage youth, is with projects like All Arctic. There's an inherent distrust between the Indigenous communities and the broader general Canadian population because of our history. So by allowing youth to be engaged by people who not only look like them but speak their language and understand everything of their lived experience, we're better able to create this kind of trust that is needed to do this work with the youth. And to not only that, but to instill hope. There's a lot of societal problems that, and the very first symptom of that is we have the highest rate of teenage suicide. So that says a lot about hopelessness. Hope is when we believe that is something better down the line, which is what keeps us sort of going. So we have a very high rate of teenage suicide. So that's the starting point. There's so many problems, and having this kind of important work to help these people, bring them speakers, activities, open up doors to all the opportunities that are offered to them through not only the digital world, but even connecting them with amazing people like we've been doing with Maggie. So yeah, that's how we engage youth.
And you've spoken about the trust between different communities. I'm interested in, the trust between your community and the Canadian authorities, because I know that there's so much history there. How is All Arctic working with the Canadian government?
Honestly, once again, this is our starting point. We have our history with the Canadian government is rooted in genocide, and the whole world came to realize that, especially recently with the findings of the residential schools. But this is something that we always, personally, I am always asked this question, and I like to sort of bring it this way. There's so many Indigenous peoples that are still living in precarious living conditions. They're very poorly housed. The heating is not good. The sewage system the hygienic conditions are not, they don't meet basic living rights. And the other one is lack of clean drinkable water. So if the government is able to at least offer that, then certainly it could show that it sheds a bit more light onto its willingness to help the youth. So that's sort of a question that bugs me a little bit, and it gives me opportunity to shed light on it. And all the greatest community leaders and Indigenous scholars came together and put up the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. So the government knows what it has to do. It just truly has to do it, and to engage with youth like that are part of All Arctic and the programs that are doing is a really good way to do one step towards reconciliation between Indigenous communities and the government, because we have this inherent distrust that was built over hundreds of years, and it's a lived experience for most of us, and it's certainly a lived experience for myself. But if I'm able to carry this voice here today, is just to say that the youth is ready to tackle on these challenges, and one way that the government can do it is follow through with the promises that they've made, and to have accountability and sort of let go of certain powers. And the power dynamics have been the same, and if reconciliation is to happen, then the government has to learn to let go of certain powers, which is also happening in the philanthropic world as well. So bridging all this together, and it's complex, but the youth is ready to tackle it, on top of which we're ready to do it in English or French. We finally learned those languages too, so we're part of this North American society, and we're here to stay. So I think the government will realize that eventually, and that's how we're better able to help the youth.
I'm really interested in that point because when I was speaking to Maggie, she was describing these sort of bureaucratic barriers to Indigenous people and Indigenous youth getting help from the authorities. So she was saying that often to apply for funding or to get assistance in other ways, you would need the equivalent of an advanced degree. And that's something which, many people just don't have, an advanced language ability. And obviously being able to speak that technical and legal language to apply for funding grants is something which is very, very specialized. Is that a fair assessment? Are there lots of sort of hurdles, unnecessary hurdles to getting help?
That's a very fair assessment, Nicholas. I think I have to admit, the pathways to get to donation or even registration and getting to know this language itself is a process, and not, I would say, a very, very small minority of people are able to actually access those spaces and those skills. So those are definitely hindrances and barriers that the government has put, and there's loopholes, but most times, if you don't have the necessary language or knowledge to be able to put up this kind of important work to fund your project and to find some staff and to get your project recognized and marketed and everything. Well, in a sense, the pathways to doing this nonprofit work is in many ways it's not indigenized in many ways. It doesn't take into reality it doesn't take into account the reality of how most Indigenous people live, which does not mean that there's not amazing projects going on, right? There's amazing ideas everywhere. There's a lot of potential, but because of the inherent way that the system is built, those hindrances inherently end up, it's secluding the Indigenous youth and communities even furthermore in a way where they can't necessarily access the funding and get to the goal that they want to accomplish. Yeah.
And I think that was something that came out so much from my conversations with Maggie, and when she described her how delighted she was that she could travel around the world following her Global Teacher Prize win with some of her students. And I think you accompanied her on at least one of her trips. Is that right? And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that experience and what it felt like and what you took away from it.
Correct. Yes. So the year was 2018. I believe Maggie was already following the prize that she won. She was already doing amazing conferences worldwide. And it's been her, after speaking with her, I realized that it's been her mandate to sort of bring Inuit youth with her on her trips so that the people she speaks with and meet actually have a direct touch and relationship with the Inuit youth. So I was one of the youth that actually I was doing my undergraduate degree at McGill University at the time, and they reached out to me and they said, "Oh, there's this amazing opportunity of going with Maggie to Colombia." I already knew Maggie at the time, and it was quite frankly, it was quite amazing. We got to put the word out there and speak about who we are and what we do and the education. We had a live TV interview. We got to meet the ambassador, a bunch of very important educators and politicians in Colombia. And quite frankly, I must admit, maybe even sometimes we are received and treated a bit better in countries abroad than within our own country by our own government and people. So in a way that was very uplifting, not only on a personal level, but it was good for me to sort of share it with my fellow Inuit, to say that, hey, listen, this is the work that I'm doing. I'm talking highly of us and what we're doing, and talking about our history through all its history. And I've been doing this work too, not just with Maggie. I've been traveling to through Argentina and Europe for some other nonprofit work that I'm involved in, which ended last year. And this is another opportunity that came through Maggie, through someone that she knew, who was in some ways, I believe, connected to people in your organization. So the branches that it has and how the intricacies of how the work can still keep happening even after such a big thing such as the Global Teacher Prize happens is really interesting, and that's sort of what we do. So Maggie and I are now, you know, doing working in this mandate of All Arctic to sort of keep doing this important project and introducing more outsiders of the community to not only the Arctic but to the Inuit youth and Inuit people in general.
Thanks so much, Felix. I'm conscious of your time, but I'm very, very grateful that you could find the time to speak with us today. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear about your work and to hear about the challenges and struggles faced by your community, but also, also to, as you say, to hear about this hope that you are working to deliver with other young people. So thank you so much, Felix. And if people want to know more about your work or the situation, is there anything that they should look at?
Absolutely. Well, Nicholas, I want to thank you as well for, you know, allowing me to be here on this podcast. I think it's a great opportunity to put the word out and to make sure that you know, more and more people know about the important work we're doing. So if people are curious and want to get involved in any capacity with All Arctic, they can visit our website, www.allarctic.org, and just reach out. We're here, and we're actively working on this, and this is just the beginning. It's certainly going to be our life project, and it's going to be passed on to the next generations. That's certainly what we aim for.
Thank you so much, Felix. And thank you everyone for listening in to today's episode. Please leave us a great review wherever you get your podcasts, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Goodbye.